Just to start, a quick question. Has anybody here heard of Netflix before? Anyone heard of Netflix? Okay, one or two people. Well, since I'm among friends, I'm going to start with a confession. Now, it's a little embarrassing, so you got to promise not to laugh, okay? I'm going to tell you my favorite city. Okay, here it goes. It's Dallas, Texas.
No way.
I'm sorry. I know it's not often that you will hear someone say that Dallas, Texas is their favorite city, but there's a very simple reason why it's Dallas, and I'm going to show it to you right now. It's because of this building. That building is the Renaissance Tower. It, for a while, was the tallest building in Dallas. It's not anymore, but the reason this building's important, and the reason Dallas is a favorite city, is because for many years, this was the headquarters of Blockbuster. And more importantly, a meeting took place here in the year 2000 that profoundly changed my life as an entrepreneur, and equally profoundly changed the trajectory of a little company that I'd started called Netflix. Now, in 2000, Netflix was a very different company than it is now. It was very small. We were less than 100 employees. I think that year we were going to do maybe $5 million US in revenue, but we were also on track to lose nearly $50 million. And it doesn't take a real business person to understand that when you're making $5 million and losing $50 million, it's not a good place. So, being a prudent entrepreneur, we did the thing that prudent entrepreneurs do and decided to seek strategic alternatives, which is code for, we've got to sell this sucker. So, we decided to reach out. And the obvious strategic alternative was Blockbuster. But in the year 2000, Blockbuster was in a very different place. We had 100 employees. Blockbuster had 60,000 employees. They had 9,000 stores. We were on track to do $5 million. They were on track to do $6 billion. We were nothing to them. So when we called, when we emailed, when we tried to get a meeting, nothing. Now, go forward a few months. We're on a corporate retreat, and it's up in the mountains outside of Santa Barbara, California. And Silicon Valley is a pretty casual place to begin with. But when you go on retreat, it's even more casual. And all I had brought with me were shorts, sandals, and t-shirts. And wouldn't you know it, that was when Blockbuster called and said, we'll see you tomorrow morning in Dallas. We were saying, how are we going to get from Santa Barbara to Dallas by the morning? So we did what every company which is $50 million in the hole would do, and we leased a jet, and we piled in the jet, and we flew to Dallas, got in a cab, went to this building, went up to maybe the 26th, 27th floor, and into a conference room that was about the size of this building, or so it seemed. And we walk in, and the Blockbuster guys are there, and they've got their very fancy suits and their fancy shoes, and there's this huge conference table, and I'm there in my shorts and a t-shirt. And I was there with my business partner, Reed Hastings, and I remember being a little jealous because Reed had buttons on his shirt. But nevertheless, we made our pitch, and we said, we'll run the online part of the business, you run the stores, we'll find the synergy, and away we go. And they nodded in the right places. And then eventually they asked the most important question of all. How much do you think we should pay for you? And Reed got his courage up and said, $50 million? And that was their reaction. Nothing. They were astounded that we would demand $50 million for this little company. And the meeting went downhill very quickly after that. And it was a long, quiet ride on the plane back to Santa Barbara. And I remember sitting in the plane with my head down, just thinking, oh, now we're going to have to kick their ass. And it took us 10 years, but eventually we did. A handful of people with no experience in the video industry managed to disrupt and take down a $6 billion corporation. Now, in one way, that's an inspiring story. It says that anybody with an idea and some hard work can eventually be successful. But what if you are the big company? What if you run that $6 billion corporation? Then the message is different. Because then it says, if you can't figure out how to disrupt yourself, you are leaving it wide open for someone to disrupt it for you. Now, Netflix was certainly a disruptive story. But Netflix was just one of 7 startups that I've had a hand in building. And since leaving Netflix about 12 years ago, I've had a chance to work with scores of early stage companies, with hundreds of entrepreneurs. I've listened to maybe 1,000 pitches. And through all my own companies, all the companies I've worked with, all the entrepreneurs I've met, I've learned one very simple thing about what it takes to be successful. And it's simple. You do not need to be in Silicon Valley. You know that. People say, oh, I can't do it here. That's simply not true. I work all over the world with early stage companies. I've seen amazing innovation in Latin America, in Asia, in small cities in Europe. It is happening every place. You do not need special training. You don't need a business degree. You don't need a computer science degree. One of my favorite entrepreneurs dropped out of college. He drove an ambulance in Los Angeles. He fought forest fires in Montana, and then started his own company. Another played in a ska band. He has dreadlocks down to his waist. And then he began a music streaming service. Another of my favorite entrepreneurs is only 17 years old. You don't need to be especially smart. I was a C student, and some of the best entrepreneurs I know were not the top students. So if these are the things you don't need to be successful, what do you need? What does separate the companies which disrupt? What makes the companies which can fight back against being disrupted? And I think there's really only 2 things. First, you need to have that tolerance for risk. And I don't mean the scary, dangerous risk like this. I mean the simple risk that comes from starting down a path and not knowing where that path's going to lead. It's the type of risk that comes when you go to a restaurant, when you're traveling, and you order something and have no idea what it is. It means starting something without knowing what's going to happen. But you can't do that randomly. You need an idea. But it doesn't need to be a big idea. Mark Zuckerberg just wanted to meet girls, and that turned into Facebook. My son was only 8 years old when he started his first company, when he realized that candy bar that he could buy for 10 cents at the grocery store could be sold the next day at school for $1. Candy arbitrage. It doesn't need to be an original idea. When I first met Jeff Bezos, he had a simple bookstore. And just think of the innovation that's come from that bookstore. People have been calling a cab for as long as there's been automobiles. And think of the innovation we're seeing with Uber and Lyft and Getaround and self-driving cars. Doesn't need to be a complicated idea. The Post-it note is a piece of paper, but this little piece of paper now sells more than $1 billion a year. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say, it doesn't even need to be a good idea. Because what is a good idea? When I told my wife the idea that ultimately became Netflix, she thought it was the stupidest thing she'd ever heard. And we've all had that experience, right? Where you have a great idea, and you come running downstairs, and you tell your spouse, or you go into work, and you tell your boss, or you tell your employees, or you tell your board of directors, and you're so excited, but what do they say? That will never work. That will never work. Why is it so hard to tell a good idea from a bad idea? Well, to help you understand that, I want to introduce you to somebody. His name is William Goldman. Now, if you don't recognize his name, I'm not surprised. William Goldman is a Hollywood guy. He's a Hollywood writer. And he's famous for people of my generation for writing a movie called Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. For younger people, he wrote a movie called Princess Bride. He's written probably 24 movies in all. He won 2 Academy Awards for screenwriting. But ironically, William Goldman is most famous for writing 3 words. And what he wrote was this: nobody knows anything. Nobody knows anything. Now, he was talking about Hollywood and about how no one knows how well a movie's going to do until after it's done it. That you can have a perfect director, you can have a great script, you can have famous actors, but you can end up with a complete flop. Or you can have a first-time director, you can have amateur actors, you can have no script at all, and end up with a movie like Blair Witch Project, which costs about $35,000 to make, and has grossed more than $250 million. How could that be? It's because nobody knows anything. It's true in Hollywood, but it's true any place people are coming up with new ideas. I mentioned before that Netflix was just one of 7 startups. Now, 2 of the companies on this list are worth more than $1 billion. 3 of them have had initial public offerings. 1 of them crashed and burned. 2 were acquired. But if I had asked anybody, including myself, on day 1, which would be which, no one could have told me. Because truly, nobody knows anything. Now, what do you do with that piece of information? If nobody knows in advance a good idea from a bad idea, what do you do? Well, there's only one thing you have to do. You have to take that risk and do something. You have to build something. You have to make something. You have to try something. You have to sell something. You have to take that first step and take this idea and collide it with the real world as quickly as possible. Because all the time you spend trying to figure out if your idea is any good is wasted. You've got to start. But it has to start with an idea. Now, one of the questions that people struggle with is, where do ideas come from? How do I come up with new ideas? How do you think of these things? And for those of us who do it for a living, there is some things that are systems that will work. And quickly I'll say, yes, you can look at new technologies, For example, the most recent startup was a big data startup that I did. You can look at current trends. You can look at new business models that you can apply to old problems. But I'm going to tell you one which is the simplest way of all to find ideas. And it's one that every single one of you can use today to come up with a new idea to change your business or start one. It's simple. You just have to look for pain. You have to train yourself to see the world as an imperfect place. That everything you see, you've got to ask, what's wrong? But I'm not saying don't solve big world problems. Stay close to home. Try and look for pain in your job, in your hobbies, in your life. And you'll see that once you start paying attention, you can't help but have ideas. Now, just to prove to you how easy this can be, I'm going to tell you about a job that I had a long time ago, 40 years ago. And it was my summer job when I was in school. I was a house painter, painting houses. Now, this is a long time ago. It was a different world. We did not have the internet. We didn't have Wi-Fi. We didn't have DVD. We didn't have streaming videos. We had very primitive time. And back then, when you went to the store to buy paint, paint used to come in a container that looked like this. I know, it's primitive. Now, let's jump forward until last summer. And I was going to paint my daughter's room. Now, it's a very different world. I mean, I can drive to the store in a self-driving car. I can have a computer on my wrist. I can have a web browser in the dashboard. There's amazing innovation. But when I went to the store this summer to buy the paint, it was interesting because now paint comes in a container like this one. No change. 40 years. Is that because this is the best possible way to sell paint? Well, I hope not. Because anybody here who's painted knows all the problems it has. So let's start by opening the can. Now, to open a can of paint requires a very special tool. It's called a screwdriver. Can you think of another consumer product that requires you to have a screwdriver to open it? Nevertheless, I do own a screwdriver, so I go and I pry the lid off my can, and now I've got a lid covered with paint, which I've got to carefully put to the side. All right, now I have to stir the paint, and there's another very specialized tool. It's called a stick. You can see it up there, and it works okay. You can stir the paint, does a good job, but now I pull the stick out, and I have a stick covered with paint, so I've got to get the paint off the stick, so you put it back in the can, and you slide it out, and now it's dry on one side and red on the other, so you flip it over and put it back in, pull it out, oh, it's dry, wet, put it back. Do that a few times. Now, I have to pour the paint. And you can see the can has an easy pour spout. So I pour the paint, and it goes okay until I tip the can back up. And then two things happen. First, unless I'm really careful, paint spills down the side of the can, where it gets on my pants or on the floor. Okay, but the other thing is, the paint fills in this little rim where the lid fits. More on that in a minute. All right, now I've got to paint. I've got to put tape on my windows. I've got to put a drop cloth on the floor. I have to have a roller, and I have to do the trim one color and the walls, and I can't tell where I'm painting, and it's spraying, and I got to clean up. I have to pull this soggy roller off the handle. Ugh. Okay, but now I have a little bit of paint left in my tray, so I pick this up and pour it back in the can. And now I've got to close the can. Now, it's perfect, isn't it? Because you need a screwdriver to open the can, and you need a hammer to close the can. So I put the lid back in the can, take my hammer, give it a few good whacks with the hammer, and I had forgotten about the paint that was in the lip of the can. And it sprays up all over my shirt, all over the walls, all over the floor. Now, as I told that story, was anybody thinking, this is silly, why don't they sell paint the same way they do water, where it's just a screw top? Or why don't they sell it in the containers that, at least in the United States, we sell laundry detergent with this fancy lid that when you tip it back up, it all goes right back in the bottle? Or why isn't there a lid you can buy afterwards that has a big spout on it? Or why isn't there a stirring mechanism at the bottom of the can? Or why can't there? Or why isn't there? Or why couldn't I? Or why don't they? Hopefully, as I told my story, these ideas just popped into your head without even trying. And if ideas popped into your head from something that happened to me, imagine what'll happen when you can train yourself to do this with your lives. Because you see, ideas do not spring out of thin air like some eureka moment. The idea for Netflix did not come from some moment of anguish over a late fee on a movie. We were looking really hard for that idea. And that idea was found in a big pile of bad ideas. And we didn't find that idea at a video store. We found the idea for Netflix in a car. Now, this story goes back more than 20 years ago when two friends and I had started a small software company. And we worked happily for about 8-9 months, and then something great happened. Our little company was bought, acquired, and it was great because the investors made some money. All of a sudden our stock was worth something, and we all got jobs at this big new company. Now there was two other fortunate things that happened. The first fortunate thing was that the person who had started and was running this big new company was a gentleman named Reed Hastings. And I was going to work for Reed. The second interesting thing was that Reed and I discovered we lived in the same town. So we began driving together back and forth to work each day. And we did this for another 6 to 7 months. And then, great news. Another acquisition. Our big company was being bought by an even bigger company. Again, our investors made even more money. Our stock options were worth even more. But the best news of all is that I got fired. But I didn't get fired in that walk of shame where you're walking out to your car with a box and it has your stapler and your coffee cup. I got fired in that wonderful Silicon Valley golden handcuffs kind of way, where they say, Mark, due to redundancies in force and due to overlapping responsibilities, blah, blah, blah. And I'm zoning out. And then all of a sudden I go, wait. Let me see if I have this right. you need me to come to work for about 6 months. You're going to keep paying me. My stock will keep vesting. I get to use my big office. But you don't need me to do anything? And they nodded. And I said, well, sign me up for that job. I'm going to use this time to start my next company. Now, Reed was in the same position. He was also being let go. He also had 6 months, but he was going to go and become an educational philanthropist, change the world. But he wanted to keep his hand in this startup world. So Reed and I agreed we'd come up with an idea together, and that he would put the money in, I would start it and run it, and off we go. But first we needed that idea. And here's how we looked for an idea. Every morning, Reed would drive and pick me up at our house in Santa Cruz. And together, we would drive up and over the Santa Cruz Mountains to our office in Sunnyvale. The drive took about an hour. And during that drive, we would brainstorm ideas. We'd think of new technologies. We'd think of current trends. We'd think of new business models. And yes, we'd look for pain. And then I'd get to work and I'd take all these ideas and I'd research them. And then at the end of the day, we get back in the car, we drive back to Santa Cruz, and I would tell Reed everything that I learned. And we did this for hundreds of ideas, all types of ideas. Some were good, some were bad. But we learned something interesting about ideas. We learned that the half-life of an idea is only 24 hours. And what that means is that if we started off on Monday morning with 16 great ideas, all exciting and full of hope and full of promise, that one day later, usually half of them bad. By Wednesday, another half bad. Thursday, down to 2 ideas. And by Friday, if we're lucky, we have 1 of those 16 ideas left. Now, I'll mention that one of these hundreds of ideas we had was video rental by mail. But it didn't take me long to figure out it was a bad idea, because video then came on a VHS cassette, heavy, expensive, and I said, not going to work. So we got rid of that idea. Until a few months later, we heard about this new technology called a DVD. Size of a CD, light, small, thin. And we had an idea. And we turned the car around, we drove back down to Santa Cruz, we went to a used music store and bought a music CD. We walked 2 doors down and bought a little envelope, the type you would put a greeting card in, put the CD in the envelope, addressed it to Reed's house in Santa Cruz, bought a stamp, and mailed it. And less than 24 hours later, when Reed came to pick me up, he didn't even need to say anything. He just held up this little envelope with an unbroken CD that had gotten to his house in less than 24 hours. And that was the moment we said, this might actually work. And then my job changed, because then I wasn't brainstorming ideas. I was trying to figure out if this one idea was going to work. And we did all kinds of research. How many DVD players were there? How many DVDs? Which movies? How much would they cost? How long would it take to build a website? How many people? But like I said, you can't tell a good idea from a bad one. No matter how much research we did, we couldn't answer that one fundamental question, which is this actually going to work? And so, eventually, we decided we had to take that risk and do something Reed wrote us a check for $2 million. We put the money in the bank, we got a small office, we hired a dozen people, and 6 months later, on April 14th, 1998, almost exactly 20 years ago, Netflix was born. Now, the Netflix back then didn't look anything like the Netflix that you know. We didn't stream movies. If you wanted a movie, we mailed it to you. It came on a DVD. The DVD went in that envelope. And when you were done with the rental, you mailed it back. We had due dates, we had late fees, we had all the same things that a video store had. There was no real innovation except for the fact there was just one store serving the whole country. And we didn't just rent movies, we also sold DVDs. And we sold a lot of DVDs. We sold so many DVDs that there was good news and bad news. The good news was by the end of that first summer, we had on track to have $100,000 that month in sales. Now, the bad news was almost all of it was selling DVDs. And that was bad news because selling is a commodity business. And we knew just a matter of time before Amazon sold DVDs, and then Walmart sold DVDs, and then every single store sold DVDs, and our margins get cut, and all of a sudden there's nothing left, and slowly but surely we're out of business. Now, rental, there was promise. Rental had high margins. Rental was complicated, defensible. The problem is, no one liked it. We couldn't get anyone to rent from us. And if they rented once, they wouldn't come back. But the worst thing of all was it turned out that doing both of them at the same time was really tricky. Because it was complicated. Some of the movies you could only sell. Some you could only rent. Some you could do both. Trying to describe who we were was hard. We sell, we rent. Just think of designing the warehousing, all the back-end systems. And we knew that if we were going to succeed, we had to pick one thing and focus. But what do we pick? Do we pick sales? Well, sales is paying 99% of our salaries, but eventually it's going to go away. Or do we focus on rental, which if we can make it work, is a potentially huge business. But boy, there is absolutely no sign right now. Now, obviously you know what we decided. We took one day and walked away entirely from rental, from sales, and bet everything on rental. Now, I need to point out that when you walk away in a single day from 99% of your revenue, it has a way of focusing the mind. And from that point on, we were desperate to make this work. And we had a lot of ideas, lots of things we wanted to test. Now, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, so at first, these tests were works of art. We would commission custom photography. We would lovingly write every single word of copy. We would spell check everything. We'd test every link. We'd stress the site. And we'd launch this test, and it took us a month. And the test would fail. And we would be disappointed. We'd say, we just wasted a month. Maybe we should go a little faster. So we'd do a test in 2 weeks. And it would fail. And we said, we just wasted 2 weeks. All right, faster. We do a test in a week. It would fail. Faster. 2 days. Faster. Every day. Faster. And pretty soon, we were testing 3, 4, 5 things every day. Now, as you can imagine, things are getting a little sloppy. We're putting up images with the wrong image or with the watermark still on it. We have spelling errors, we have typos, we have dead links. We would crash the site. But no matter how bad the test was, it didn't make a difference. Because what we realized is, if it was a bad idea, then even a perfect test wasn't going to make it a good idea. But if it was a good idea, then it didn't make a difference how bad the test was, because people immediately would raise their hands and they'd fight their way to take advantage of whatever our offer was. They would call us up, they would reboot the site, and then it was crystal clear what we had to focus on. There was a huge insight from that. And the insight was that it was not about having good ideas. It's about building a system and a culture for trying lots of bad ones. It's coming up with ideas, lots of them, and figuring out a way to quickly and easily try them and test them. Now, you guys are all experienced. You're aware of lean startup methodology. You're aware of minimal viable product. But I'm going to say there's a way to go even faster. And it's based on the same principle. It's based on faking it. It's based on testing something without really doing it. It's something that I call validation hacking. Now, validation hacking is testing something without doing it at all. You're probably scratching your head going, what does that mean? So let me give you a quick example. This is a company that I worked with about 7 or 8 years ago. It was started by a young entrepreneur in San Francisco, and then one night he was at a party. It was probably 1 o'clock in the morning, and something happened to him that has happened to every young person at a party at 1 in the morning. They ran out of beer, and they began arguing. Whose turn was it to go out in the rain, find an open store, buy beer? And he had an idea. He goes, this is 7 years ago, don't forget. He goes, well, my phone knows where I am. My phone knows all the open liquor stores. My phone has my credit card. It knows what I like. Genius. I'll hit a button and it'll order the beer will show up. Great idea. Or was it? Now, if I had that idea 20 years ago, I would have built a minimal viable product. I would have done a test. I would have hired an engineer. It would have taken me several months and a lot of money. And he didn't want to do any of that. He wanted to quickly and easily figure out if it was a good idea. So he thought to himself, well, what am I curious about? Do I wonder if my phone knows where I am? No, that's obvious. Do I wonder if I could have a database of open stores? No. Do I wonder whether anyone trusts me to have their credit card? No. He wondered about things you could only know by doing it. Like, would the orders happen all at once or spread out over the week? Would people repeat? But he did not want to hire an engineer. He didn't want to raise money. So here's what he did. He printed up his printer some business cards. And the business cards just said, need beer? Call me. And he went and stood outside apartment buildings at night, and whenever someone came up who was in the right demographic, he gave them a card and said, hey, need beer? Call me. And he'd wait, and people would call him, and he would get in his bicycle, and he would go to the liquor store, he would buy the beer, he'd bring it back, he'd put on a Viking costume, don't ask. He'd go up in the elevator and deliver the beer. And he learned it was a bad idea that everyone did order on Friday and Saturday over a narrow window. The orders were small. Everybody was always drunk. But he found that out with just a business card and his time. But he also learned what the market did want. He got ideas. He tried those ideas until eventually, using only his bicycle and a business card, came up with the idea that did work and did scale. And he proved it. And only then did he raise the money and start the company. That's a validation hack. And there's plenty of more examples of ways to be clever and say, how do I test this without doing it? Now, Netflix obviously was doing a lot of validation hacking on their own. But even when you're doing tests that are quick and easy, even when you're doing 5 tests a day, eventually you begin to run out of time or run out of money, and we were running out of both. But we had 3 ideas left. Now, you have to remember that we're mailing out DVDs in an envelope, which didn't work very well. So the idea was, first, we have a whole warehouse full of movies just sitting there. Maybe we store the movies at the customers' houses. Let them just keep them. And when they're done, they mail it back, and we'll send them a new one. Maybe. Okay. But when they send the movie back, then they've got to come back to the website and pick the next movie. And no one wants to do that. So let's have them build a list once. So when we send a movie back, automatically, the next one on the list goes out. Okay. Third, rather than charging them each time they change a movie, let's just charge them a monthly fee. And we bundled all 3 of these ideas together and tested them. And it was a bad test, but immediately it worked. People all began coming. They began telling their friends. They began staying. And all of a sudden, things took off. And it marked the moment, a year and a half after starting, that we finally figured out how to have a real business. But remember, nobody knows anything. And if you had asked me on April 14th, 1998, day 1, what do you think the idea that finally works is going to look like? I never could have told you, because nobody knows anything. And even if you had let me cheat, even if you had given me multiple choice, and you would put this as one of the choices, I never would have got it right, because nobody knows anything. And in fact, on April 14th, 1998, I wasn't even thinking about this. I was worrying about something very, very different. I was worried, is this new website that we've spent 6 months building going to work? Now, on April 14th, 1998, I remember we were in my conference room in my office. And calling it a conference room is probably a bit of an exaggeration. It was maybe this big. And at one end, we had a table. And on the table, we had a computer. And the computer had been set up that a bell would ring whenever an order came in. And at this side of the conference room, we had another table, and on this table was big bottles of champagne. And we were going to toast ourselves when all of a sudden this new site worked. So, 9 a.m., our CTO hits a few keys, and we're live. And we stand around looking at each other until ding, our first order. And we cheer, and we all go over and begin opening the champagne, and we're pouring the champagne, and then ding, ding, 2 more orders, and we cheer, and we're toasting each other, and then ding, 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 ding. We now have 7 total orders, and I'm so happy, and the site works, and it goes on for a while, and we go, it's kind of quiet. The bell hasn't rung in a while. Is it plugged in? And we had crashed all of our servers. First 30 minutes. So my memory of April 14th is not toasting my success with champagne. It's pushing a shopping cart up and down in a big electronics store as we filled it up with all the parts we'd use to rebuild our servers. And we had a bet about how many orders we'd have that first day. Some people said 3, some people said 50. And when the day finished, we had 100 orders. 100 orders. I never imagined that. That was my whole first month quota. 100 people had ordered from us in one day. But then, 3 years later, after we figured out our new model, we had 125,000 subscribers. 125,000 people all subscribing to Netflix. But now we have 125 million subscribers. We have people subscribing all over the world. Almost every country. We make our own movies. We make our own television shows. I promise you, I never in a million years dreamed that Netflix would become what it is and accomplish what it has. Now, people come up to me a lot and say, Mark, oh, Netflix, I love Netflix. You've got to be so proud. And I am proud. But I'll tell you the truth is I'm never quite sure what I should be proud of. Now, is it that I was smart? Well, no. As I've explained, most of my ideas are bad ones. But I do keep trying, so maybe it's that I'm persistent. Okay, I'm a little proud that I'm so persistent. But actually, the thing that I'm most proud of is optimism. I am an optimist. And I'm not a glass half full optimist. I'm a glasses overflowing optimist. I've done some angel investing, and I will confess to you all that I'm a very bad angel investor. And I have no excuse. I should be a good angel investor. I understand the technology, I can evaluate the team, I can see the holes in their strategy, but I can't help it. I'll listen to the pitch, and all of a sudden, before I can stop myself, I grab the marker in their hand. This just might work. I believe. The reason I'm such a bad angel investor is that I love every idea that I hear. And that's not a good formula for an angel investor. So, earlier, when I told you there was just 2 things that you need to either start a company, have your company disrupt the big company, be the big company that manages to evolve itself to defend itself against a small company. I wasn't quite being truthful because there's actually 3 things. Yes, you do have to have the tolerance for risk. That risk-taking is fundamental. And if you don't have the courage to start, you'll never get there. Yes, you do have to have an idea. And as I hope you understood today, not just one idea, you're going to have to be good at coming up with hundreds of ideas, if not thousands of ideas, and trying them all until you find the one that works. But the thing that you need most of all, you need to have confidence. You have to believe that when everyone's telling you it's a bad idea, when each one of your tests doesn't succeed, when each of your ideas doesn't work, that you can say to yourself, I am going to figure this out. Someone is going to solve this problem. It may as well be me. I want to close today by introducing you to one more person. His name is Nolan Bushnell. He's a bit better known than William Goldman. He's considered the father of the video game industry. He was the founder of Atari. But the reason I wanted you to meet Nolan today is because Nolan said something that has always spoken to me. And what he said was this: everyone who's ever taken a shower has had an idea. But it's the person who gets out of the shower, dries off, and does something about it that makes the difference. I know if you're at all like me, you've sat there 100 times. You've gone to conferences, and they're stimulating, and they're full of ideas, and you're getting inspired, and you go, wow, I'm really going to go back to the office, and I'm going to make it happen. But then you get back to the office, and there's all the emails, and there's all the phone calls, and that idea you had, gone. But this time, let it be different. Take your idea and do something. Try something. Build something. Make something. Test something. Get out of the shower. Dry off. And do something and make the difference. And if you come running downstairs with that great idea and you tell your spouse, or you come into the office and you tell your coworkers, or you tell your boss, or you tell your employees, and you're all excited, and they say, that'll never work. Well, you should call me, because I love every idea that I hear. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon.